Hello, and welcome to Armin's Armchair Adventures. This is, you guessed it, Armin. So, what if English was more like Dutch? What I'm going to do here might not make sense at first glance, so let's dive into it with a quick example first. Take, for instance, the Dutch word ziekenhuis, which means hospital. You don't really need to be a linguist to see it literally means a sick house, a house for the sick people. We can do this because Dutch and English are members of the West Germanic language branch, and as a result they share a lot in common. Incidentally, sick house exists as a word in Middle English. Hospital, the word we use today, like many other words in modern English, comes from Old French, and ultimately from Latin. From the same root we have hospitable, host, hostel, hotel, and many other words. So what I'm set out to do here is to offer some speculative and, I like to think, really fun alternatives to modern English words, using the Germanic Dutch equivalents as a template. 3 important caveats before we start our journey. I'm using Dutch because I'm studying Dutch at the moment. To my native Dutch-speaking audience, sorry for butchering the Dutch pronunciations at times. I've been studying for just about a year. Secondly, there is an actual movement that proposes English as a type of Anglo-Saxon alternative with less Romance, Greek, and non-Germanic influence in general. I'm not a language purist and I don't find it a good idea at all. Lastly, the constructions that I propose here don't have bulletproof linguistic basis, and I'm not a linguist in any shape or form. You might be asking then, why are you making these monstrosities of words, butchering both English and Dutch? The answer is simple. It's just fun, as you'll see. And also I find it a very helpful tool in learning Dutch. If you're a Dutch learner or a Dutch teacher, my approach might prove useful, so please stick around. And I'm sure many other language enthusiasts would also find this interesting, especially folks who are into Old English, Germanic languages, or etymology buffs in general. So, let's get into it. The first word is boekhouden. In Dutch it means accounting. We can literally translate it as boekhouding, a made-up word, which corresponds to the Dutch word. Houden in Dutch is cognate with the verb to hold in English. But in Dutch it often has more the connotation of to keep something. For example, to hold a conversation in Dutch is een gesprek houden. Actually, another word for accounting in English is bookkeeping. The next word is onverwacht. In Dutch it means unexpected. As I encountered it for the first time while I was learning Dutch, I just automatically converted it into onverwacht or onverwacht, just to make sense of it for myself. The prefix on in onverwacht is cognate with the English prefix on, meaning not. So not expected, as in unexpected. And wachten is cognate with the verb to wait, meaning to guard, to watch, or to expect something. I use the prefix for the ver part of verwacht, and I'm not really sure why, but it seems like in many cases the prefix ver in Dutch corresponds to for in English. For example, the verb to forbid in Dutch is verbieden, or forsaken is verzaken in Dutch. Next we have onsterfelijkheid in Dutch, meaning immortality. Don't be intimidated by the length of this word. Dutch and German words can be quite long, but let's break it down. On is the same as the prefix on, so meaning not or the opposite. Sterfelijk is actually sterven leek. Sterven is cognate with the English verb to starve. Albeit in Dutch it means to die. In English it also means to die, but due to the lack of food. The leg part in sterfelijk is cognate with the English like or lie, to be like something. And the suffix heid at the end of onsterfelijkheid is cognate with the English suffix goed, meaning the state or manner of being in a certain way. So the whole thing onsterfelijkheid, meaning immortality, becomes onsterfelijkheid. One cool thing about lake that I just mentioned, I first came across this factoid while I was listening to the History of English podcast, I highly recommend it, by the way. But briefly, the verb liken in Dutch means to like or seem to like something or have the form of something. Ultimately also cognate with the English suffix "ly" as in happily or friendly. The "ly" is the shortened version of like, so it actually used to be happy-like or friend-like. It's not really hard to see how when you say it really fast it becomes shorter, like lek, lek, leek, ly. So over time it became ly. Actually in Dutch it's also pronounced more like lek, not a very pronounced A sound. It's more like a quick lek sound. So for example, friendly in Dutch is vriendelijk, similar to German freundlich. And incidentally, in Old English it was something like vijandlich. Sorry for using the quotative like so many times. I know that it annoys some people to no end. So what is the quotative like? Quotative like in modern English refers to when you use like in the casual conversation to convey a sort of impersonation or to give a general feel of what is being said, usually to soften the language. For example, I was like I was like saying. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. It's just fascinating. If you ask me, like is one of the most versatile words in the English language. We have the word maatschappij in Dutch, which means society or community. Maat is cognate with mate in English, and schap with ship. So maybe we can translate it part by part as mateshipy or mateshippery. The suffix ship, as in friendship or mateship, comes from a Proto-Germanic root which means shaping or condition. Actually, shape is also cognate with ship, or the suffix scape, for example, as in landscape. Landscape, by the way, is a loanword from Middle Dutch into English. In modern Dutch, it's pronounced as landschap, meaning the condition or scenery of the land. Originally, it referred to the Dutch paintings, the scenery in it, of course. I don't know why when it was borrowed into English, it hasn't taken the shape of landship. Instead, we have landscape, which is actually closer to the sound of the Middle Dutch, landskap, which it has originated from. So maybe that's why it hasn't become landship, but landscape instead. Mateship, incidentally, is an Australian cultural idiom that embodies equality, loyalty, and friendship. It's a nice name for a community or society of people taking care of each other, don't you think? Eigendom means property. Eigen is cognate with own in English, and we have the exact same suffix dom in English. So the whole thing becomes oondom for property or state. Actually, the word for state in Dutch is landgoed, literally landgoed. Good or goods, as in for example goods and services in English, is basically the same thing. Or thinking of it, we have also vrachtgoed in Dutch, literally freight good in English. It's not 100% of the time rule, but in my experience on many occasions, words which have this hard fricative G sound, ge, or the ch in Dutch, they often have softer counterparts in English. They sound more like A instead of the hard ge sound. For example, the number 8 in Dutch is acht, or the color green is groen, or night is Nacht. In German, the G is actually more like the English soft G, since English has also gone under something similar to the High German consonant shift. Independently, of course. Historical linguistics, huh? What is it good for? If you know some basic rules like the second Germanic consonant shift, you can oftentimes predict what a word would sound like in Dutch, in Low German, High German, Modern English, or Old English, or in any other direction. It's quite handy. Voorouders in Dutch is ancestors in English. Ancestor again comes from Old French. Voor in Dutch means in front of, for or before in English. For example, voorhand in Dutch means in advance or beforehand. Voorouders is literally four elders. That's a nice word right there, four elders. I believe it was actually a word in Middle English. Ondanks in Dutch means despite, in spite of something. We can turn it into ondanks, as in not thanks to it. We have also ondankbaar in Dutch, which means ungrateful, thankless. Baar in ondankbaar acts like the suffix able in English, as in acceptable. Or in this case, ondankbaar becomes unthankable. Baar has similar roots to the English verb to bear. You can already see I don't really follow strict linguistic rules. It's more of a gut feeling. Dutch-speaking people also sometimes make similar mistakes when they speak English. It's affectionately called Dunglish. I don't know whether to call what I do here Dunglish, or maybe in Dutch it could be called Nederlands, or just call it as it is, some made-up words. At times these connections aren't even cognates, they're just false friends. But I believe the existence of these false or half friends has personally helped me to learn Dutch much faster, especially when you compare it to more distantly related languages such as English and Chinese. Stofzuiger. It means vacuum cleaner. Literally, you can turn it into stuff sucker. Because that's what a vacuum cleaner really is, isn't it? A device for sucking stuff off the floor. Stof is cognate with the English stuff. It comes from Old French, but it's actually a loan word from Old High German with similar roots with stop or to stop something. For example, the verb verstoppen in Dutch. It means to hide or to clog something, as in, for example, the drainage is clogged, or your nose is stuffed up, let's say. Fun fact, in Dutch you don't say put the book in your bag. You say stop het boek in je tas. Or you can also say doe het boek in je tas. The Dutch verb doen is of course cognate with the English verb to do. You can again see my point about cognates and false friends. They're always super handy. Voedingsmiddel. It means nutrient or nourishment. Voedings is cognate with the verb to feed, and middel with the English middle. So it all becomes feeding middle. Although middle has more the meaning of means, medium or resources in Dutch. Lastly, we have vrijwilliger. It means a volunteer. Vrijwilling is literally free willing, as in a free willing individual. So basically the whole thing becomes free willing, or maybe free willer. That's not exactly right, but you get the point. The English word volunteer comes from Old French, which itself comes from Latin voluntas, from the ancient accusative singular present participle of velle, to wish, or to want something. It ultimately comes from the same Indo-European root of to will something or to want something. So, in a sense, willing, vrijwilliger, and volunteer are distantly related. Okay, so that's it. 10 words in Dutch and my mangled up Dutch dub English equivalents. Thanks for staying with me this far, and I really hope you've enjoyed this word journey with me. I will make more stuff like this, so please do subscribe. As someone who speaks the Germanic language, learning Dutch feels like playing detective. Probably to some extent this is also true for speakers of many other Indo-European languages. But if you ask me, this is especially true for speakers of other Germanic languages. At the end, please remember to take everything that I say with a grain of salt. They're not general linguistic rules, and I haven't discovered anything new. This is by no means a bulletproof method. But I must say I've learned Dutch much faster and better than Chinese, in a much shorter time span. Often the new words just click when they have similar counterparts in the language that you already know. It's satisfying and fun to learn a new language this way. Thanks again everyone, and take care. Bedankt en tot de volgende.